All right, welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube. Today we're going to go into a little overview of the loss to Gold Coast in our first game of the season. And I have to say, I do have every intention of sugarcoating this one. But first, before I get rolling, I've got a little request of everybody enjoying the content on this channel to please take a moment and hit the subscribe button. The YouTube analytics for this channel continues to show repeat viewers throughout our off-season that aren't subscribers. So if you're one of these people who do enjoy watching these videos, please know that every subscriber makes a huge difference towards making the work of putting these videos together a viable investment in time, which is a bit of a rare commodity. And until this account reaches enough subscribers to monetize, it really is just a bit of a time-consuming passion. But enough of that. Let's get into this supposed sugarcoating business. And right off the bat, I'm going to say the same thing I said all season about the preseason performances, and that is it's just too early to go making any sweeping assumptions about where a side is at. I think Richmond may have already proved a little bit of that on Thursday night, which is, I suppose, a good little blueprint to follow. But the West Coast side that ran out yesterday, it's adopted a new game plan with a very fresh list of players under a brand new coach. And the time it takes to get settled under that system isn't instant. But coming up against quality opponents is instant, which is what happened with Gold Coast. It's very early to be sure, but Gold Coast looks like a premier team. And unfortunately, you just can't come up against sides like that while you're still learning a new plan and developing youngsters. So for all I've said about things that we can't know for sure this early in the season, I'm going to try and focus on the things we can say for sure from the loss. And one of that is the best players that we had from yesterday. And to be honest, this list is pretty small today, so it won't be a long one. At the very top of this list, I'm sure anyone who watched the game would agree, was Liam Baker. His ability to generate momentum was absolutely elite. He was generating it from really nowhere as well. He was a one-man show moving the ball forwards, which is his strength, which is he doesn't really need any of the guys around him to be on their game for him to put his best foot forward, which is it's a very rare trait in AFL. Sometimes you can have a great game, but it's very hard to do that when no one around you is feeding you the ball or at least getting run moving. So I think it was a very good acquisition getting him into the side, and he's already paid himself off in round one. From start to finish, he was a shining light against a dominant Suns outfit. He had 7 contested possessions, 3 intercepts, and most importantly, he just generated run against the flow of play with almost all of his 19 touches. The next best, in my opinion, was Ruben Jinby. It feels weird to say this given all the spotlight that he's received from his first couple of years, but this appears to be Ruben's breakout year. I said during the preseason hitouts that the biggest surprise from Jinby during those scratch matches was his lateral movement. He started stepping around guys consistently in that intra-club preseason scratch matches, and it just seems to be a really new trait for someone that I used to see as a straight line player. And today that all appeared to come together. Between his size, his confidence, and those new game smarts that he's developed, he looked unstoppable with every one of his 14 possessions, which isn't a huge count, but in the scheme of how the game played out, it was pretty decent. And more importantly, it was what he did with all of them. So I saw that as one of the very few positives from a big loss. Jack Graham was also definitely in the best. It's a very workmanlike rap that he's always going to get from me when I do these reviews if he's played well. But for a game where we were dominated in the midfield, he was our top possession winner, and his defensive work really stood out. For anyone who thinks that sounds familiar, it's almost the exact same thing that I said about our game against North Melbourne, albeit we beat North in that game, but it was a very similar look in the midfield. We weren't really controlling the match from there, and once again, we've really let a game be controlled from the middle of the ground with Jack Graham doing everything he can to try and stem that. Same goes for Jack Hutchinson. Not quite the same output, but he showed elite defensive pressure in a game where we really struggled to control the flow of Gold Coast ball movement. And then just, I think, given the supply, it's worth noting that our key forwards, Oscar Allen and Jake Waterman, both did their jobs. And post-match, I did hear that Waterman's substitution was apparently described as precautionary, which is reassuring because he's a very important part of the team, one of our shining lights. Other than these guys, I'm going to give a few special mentions. I thought my favourite up-and-comer Tyrell Dewar earned himself a place in next week's side, which is important step forwards. He did get a fair bit of the footy, but it's also worth noting a lot of those were kickouts. But it wasn't quite that. It was more just how much X factor he showed around the ground, which in some of the times that he did have his hands on the ball, he looked like he was getting the ball moving a little bit more than anyone else was managing. I also thought Elijah Hewitt only got better every quarter that went by. After I think he had to dust off just a few expected cobwebs in the first half, just from that really long stint on the sidelines that he's had. But that's just about it, really, for the guys that were promising and played well. So it takes me to the key conclusions from this loss. Most importantly, again, it's the first game of the season, so it's a little bit early to make sweeping conclusions. But Gold Coast against us was just utterly too good. Starting in the midfield, that dominance inevitably just spread across the entire ground. The overall disposal count and the inside 50s and territory control were massively in their favour. I'm not going to give the numbers, but those were probably the most skewed statistics. And I think if you watched, you wouldn't be surprised by that. But it all started from the centre bounces. And really what you're going to look at is you're comparing two lists here yesterday against a side that's got Jared Witt's absolute tower mountain of a ruckman, tapping down to Noah Anderson, Matt Rowell, Took Miller. West Coast just didn't have the class to match that. And it really did feel like a difference in firepower, which is entirely acceptable, in my opinion, when you compare the two list profiles. Each of the guys I mentioned for Gold Coast, they're top tier A graders at the peak of their skills. They're in the perfect window at the moment. And West Coast's list, especially in that midfield, is a mix of youth and talent and then reasonable skill at the more senior level. And I think the most immediate solution to an imbalance in firepower like that is probably just to make sure you don't have two attacking mids at the same centre bounce. So you've got your ruckman and you've got your three mids at those bounces. I think the balance, and I think I did see it after the first quarter, they started to really swing. I think like your Harley Reeds and your Tim Kellys, who are the attacking mids, out from being both there at the same time. And you got your defensive guys like Jack Graham, Jack Hutchinson, and even towards the end of the game, you could see Elijah Hewitt's got that ability to really pressure both ways. And they were going 2-1 for the second half. So I hope that was a conscious decision. I'm assuming it was. But long term, you want that experience where the young mids develop both sides of their game, a bit like what I was describing from where Elijah Hewitt's hopefully headed, so that they're just effective both ways. You kind of want to be developing a new crop of Elliot Yeos. And like I said, the best example I saw of that was that Hewitt seems to have that to his game while he's still developing. It's just something that just shows rather than actually is fully developed. So just in conclusion, it's a young list. It's a new game plan, and the Gold Coast Suns may turn out to be one of the worst sides to come up against at the start of the year if you're both of those two things. The bad news is, unfortunately, so are the Brisbane Lions in round 2, which is going to also be a tough one. So on that cheerful note, I'm just going to say thanks for tuning in, and I'll hopefully see you guys all again next week. Until then,